Welcome back. We are in session 5 of the certainty of identity. And in this session, we're looking at Daniel chapter 5 and examining the identity in a corrupt culture. So we start by asking the question, what happens when culture around you no longer respects what's sacred, when holiness is mocked and trivialized? This is not subtle pressure. This is open rebellion. Daniel chapter 5 verses 1 through 4 reads, Belshazzar, the king, made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. And that is the end of verse 4. So we're looking here just to recap what went on. Belshazzar decides to throw a feast, and in his arrogance, he brings the sacred vessels from the house of God. Now, these were not just ordinary items. They were wholly consecrated and set apart for use by God in his service or service to God. But Belshazzar decides to praise false gods by using these sacred utensils. Corrupt culture does not just ignore God, it repurposes what belongs to him. So this was very nervy of him. So Daniel 5 verses 5 through 9 reads, In the same hour the fingers of a man's hand appeared and wrote opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote, and then the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him so that the joints of his hips were loosened and his knees knocked against each other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke, saying to the wise men of Babylon, Whoever reads this writing and tells me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck. And he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now all the king's wise men came, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king its interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed, and the lords were astonished. It's the end of verse 9. So suddenly we see this hand appearing on the wall, or they see this hand appearing on the wall, and it writes on the wall. And no one understands it. So that's got to be terrifying to see it in the first place. And then to now not know what's being written. Is this about me? What is this? What's going on? I'm missing the message and I need to know. And that's what happens when culture rejects God. It loses the ability to interpret what he's doing. You cannot connect with what he's doing when you fail to respect him. Daniel chapter 5 verses 10 through 17 reads, The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came to the banquet hall. The queen spoke, saying, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your countenance change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom the Spirit of the Holy God, in whom is the Spirit of the Holy God. And in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers, inasmuch as an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting dreams, solving riddles, and explaining enigmas were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will give the interpretation. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Are you that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard of you, that the Spirit of God is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretations, but they could not give the interpretation of the thing. and I have heard of you that you can give interpretations and explain enigmas. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. And that is the end of that reading. And so we're just recapping here that Daniel was called in again, and the king offers him rewards. He offers him position, he offers him power, and he offers him promotion. But Daniel refuses. He says, you know what, keep your gifts. And we have to pay attention to this. This is critical, because now we see that his identity is not only free from fear, it's free from incentive. If your identity can be bought, it will eventually be sold. So keep that in mind and watch how Daniel moves through this. Now we're reading Daniel chapter 5, verses 18 to 29. O King, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father a kingdom and majesty, glory and honor, and because of the majesty that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up, and whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and appoints over it whomever he chooses. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this, and you have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven. They have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze and iron, wood and stone, which do not see or hear or know. And the God who holds your breath in his hand and owns all your ways, you have not glorified. Then the fingers of the hand were sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the inscription that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Paris, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Okay, so that's the ending of verse 29. So we're just looking at how Daniel recounted Nebuchadnezzar's story, step by step, just establishing the great authority that he had and the great pride that consumed him, what he suffered, how he was punished, and how he had to recognize who the Lord was. Then Daniel confronts Belshazzar. He says, you knew all of this and still did not humble yourself. That's willful rebellion. And Daniel does not soften the message. He interprets the writing that was numbered, weighed, and divided. Judgment had come. Daniel verses 30 and 31. That very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And that's the ending of the reading of chapter 5. So we just see that very night, Belshazzar lost his life, the kingdom fell, and it was given to someone else. And that's because when identity is rejected at the top, collapse does follow. He should have never mocked God. He should have never used the sacred vessels for profane purposes. And he did this boldly and willfully. And so just because you did this As the culture dishonoring God openly, that was the result. That was the consequence. And Daniel's response, paying attention to his known and established identity within himself, was that he didn't soften the truth, he didn't fear authority, but he spoke judgment clearly. You've got to remember that when culture loses reverence, identity must not lose clarity. It is written that God never leaves himself without a witness. So when you establish your identity, you get the opportunity to be that witness for God. You're not called to blend into corruption. You're called to confront it. In chapter 5, we see that identity stood in corruption. But in chapter 6, it will be targeted by law. Until that time, may God be with you and heaven smile upon you. Blessings.